Hello, my name is Sammy Bradar, Associate Group Editor for the National Provisioner. I'm here today with Rabobank's Lance Zimmerman, Senior Beef Analyst for North American Markets. Lance, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Sammy.
So, for today's discussion, we're going to be doing a deep dive on the current beef market outlook. And we're going to be doing a deep dive into Rabobank's recent beef market outlook report. So, to kick off today's conversation, Lance, how will heifer retention influence domestic beef production in the coming year in 2025?
Yeah, everybody's really anxious about when is the U.S. beef cow herd going to start its rebuilding efforts. And we all recognize that that takes cow calf producers across the United States to retain those heifer calves, keep them on farms and ranches, and keep those younger calves around to develop into future cows. We've been decimated with what is 5 years of drought. And right now, as we look at it, heifer retention's happening very slowly. Most of our cow calf operations across the US tend to sell their calves in the fall of every year. So we already somewhat know what that heifer retention activity has been like going into 2025, because most of that is already set in motion in fall of 2024. So as we look at 2025, heifer retention overall so far on farms and ranches has been pretty minimal, probably just enough to keep the cow herd relatively stable for the next 12 months. But what it means is, as we navigate through this year, cattle slaughter is likely to start the year relatively steady from a fed steer and heifer standpoint. But then as we get past the midpoint of the year, we'll start to see that slaughter number tail off a little bit, show more of a year over year decline than what we've seen here recently. And a lot of that'll be due to pulling some of those heifers out of the beef supply chain, keeping them on farms and ranches, and developing them into herd replacements. And so we'll gradually start to feel those effects towards the end of this year, and then likely start to feel that more and more throughout the supply chain in terms of tighter cattle availability as we look to 2026, 2027, and probably even into 2028.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you for those great insights.
Yeah.
Looking at beef processors and producers, what strategies can they employ to manage these elevated costs and limited availability that they're facing and will be facing increasingly?
Yeah, I think one of the most jarring things that's happening across the beef industry right now is we're literally sitting in a demand period that's the highest many of us have seen in 3 decades. And on top of that, we're also seeing these supplies tighten. If we were dealing with either one of those, it would be price supportive to the market, whether we're talking calves on ranches or beef at the retail store or anything in between. But really, we're having two factors, tighter supplies and stronger demand, that are both uplifting the price at the same time. And so we literally just saw the USDA post their February retail beef prices, and they were new all time highs. The all fresh beef price was on top of $8.30 a pound. We usually don't see all time record highs in February. It's usually a softer demand period. But retailers had to adjust their meat case prices higher because the wholesale market was so phenomenally strong in January. And so as we look at this, everyone, whether they're a rancher or retailer, is having to adjust their management practices because every pound of beef they buy or every animal that they bring into their operation costs more. And so it means that everybody's got to be that much more vigilant in their procurement strategies. They got to be that much more careful in how they manage that animal or that product through their supply chain. And then obviously they have to be very focused on marketing to make sure that they're getting the full value of that animal or the full value of that piece of beef realized on the sales side as well.
Definitely, definitely. And we've talked a lot about the supply chain and beef processors themselves, but looking at consumers and their demand for beef products, would you say that that's slowed or changed over the last few years? And how do you expect it to change in the coming years as well?
Yeah, one of the things that's phenomenal as we look across the animal protein space is we've seen over the last 3 decades, really, the beef industry has really strived to differentiate itself from pork, from poultry, from seafood, and really stand alone. They've made a lot of investments in marbling. They've made a lot more investments in merchandising and branding. And I think we're seeing that pay off today. I mentioned earlier, we're seeing beef demand today as high as we've seen it at any point since 1986. We really saw beef demand bottom in the late 1990s. And essentially every year on average since the 1990s, we've seen demand improve 1 to 2 percentage points a year. It was a little bit shocking to see such strong demand coming out of a year like 2024 when we saw consumer headwinds continue to mount. We're certainly feeling that as we start 2025, yet we continue to post new all time highs in beef prices. And so, one of the natural questions is why? How? And I think a lot of it is that payoff of investing in marbling. It obviously creates a unique taste profile to beef, makes it more tender, more juicy, more flavorful. And I think the consumer's sitting there today and they're telling the animal protein industry, hey, beef is expensive, but they've invested in ways to make that product expensive but worth it. It still has a unique value proposition. And that's manifest itself even to the point that when we look at beef and we talk about those substitution effects that we always talk about with like consumer trade from beef to pork to poultry, some of those substitution effects have really eroded really in the last decade to the point that today income is more of a driver of what we see influencing beef demand, lesser so that true substitution effect of the value difference between beef and those competing items.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And you touched on this a little bit, but how can beef products continue to compete with less expensive pork and poultry? Obviously, there's that value equation, but is there anything else that the category can do to really set itself apart?
Yeah, it's really interesting whether you look at consumer research that comes out of Purdue University with some of their monthly consumer surveys or Kansas State University with some of the work that they do with their monthly meat demand surveys. One of the things that continues to ring true is not only does taste drive that value equation in the mind of the consumer, but also the relative value proposition. So, what am I getting for each dollar I spend? And then lastly, one of the other items that always ranks towards the top is convenience. And so as I talk to folks, whether it's a cattle rancher or whether it's an end user trying to get that product prepared for the consumer, is focusing on those three things. What are we doing to add quality to the product? What are we doing to make sure that it hits a value driver that's key in the mind of the consumer? And then what are we doing to make that product more convenient? And I think when we look at this environment that we're in from a supply chain standpoint over the last 5 years, this post pandemic period, we've been able to do that as a supply chain. Today, if the consumer sits back and says, gosh, going out to eat at the restaurant's really expensive, they can still order that meal on an app, pick it up on their drive home, and they save 20% by not paying a tip. They save the bar bill, but they still get a really great eating experience without a lot of time investment. We also are seeing more food services at retail. We're seeing more pre cooked and pre packaged product coming into our stores as well that consumers can take home, heat, and serve and be a very high quality product. And then we're also seeing more value added in the service case and delivering products to consumers that resonate with them there. Pre marinated, pre seasoned, unique presentations. And I think all of that is adding value to a consumer that I think is more willing to take products home, prepare products at home, because the pandemic also allowed them to gear up. They have a sous vide machine, they have an air fryer, they have a smoker, they have a grill, they have a flat top. And I think all of that plays into beef's hands very, very well in giving a consumer a lot of options. So even if they can't afford a top end steak, they're still willing to buy maybe it's a chuck steak, maybe it's ground beef, maybe it's just kebabs to still hit at a price point that works for them.
Definitely, definitely. And we're seeing consumers really, really place a lot of emphasis on sourcing and just transparency in general. How is this consumer demand for transparent food products? How is that impacting the beef supply chain and the beef industry in general?
Yeah, I think we've seen a big impact in that already beginning. Consumers want to know How is my food raised? Where is it raised? How is this purchase benefiting a family farm? And the beef industry is built on the backs of family farms. When we look at the average size of the cow calf producer in the United States, it's between 40 and 45 head. And so it's very much so a family business at its grassroots level. And so we're seeing an increase in process verified programs, and we're seeing more of an interest in tracking management. What was the health program of these cattle? What was the diet of these cattle? How did they transition from the ranch to the feed yard to the processor to my retail store? And I think technology is really lowering the cost of bringing those programs to the consumer with the information that they want. And now going forward, I think there's two things that are really going to speed up some adoption of that. One is, I think in general, the consumers showing that they're not necessarily willing to pay a great premium for that, but they still want to know it. And so, in order to increase that implementation and bring it to consumers, we got to bring the cost of that process down. And technology today is allowing us to do that. We're seeing more individual animal ID. We're seeing more information traceability from how that animal was raised, getting it all the way through that information, all the way through to the end user. Technology is going to help a great deal with that. I also think one of the things we're going to see as we rebuild this cow herd, to kind of come full circle with your first question, is we're seeing that operations that are choosing to lean into this next herd rebuild, they're typically younger operators, willing to take on that risk and that extra investment it takes to bring those new herd replacements into the operation, and they're willing to lean into technology as they do that. And I think that's really helpful and going to create and spur on more of those initiatives going forward.
Definitely. I completely agree with you. Lance, do you have any other beef category insights that you think that beef industry stakeholders and the provisioner audience should really know going into the rest of the year?
Yeah, I think 2025, if we haven't already seen it, you should know it's going to be an exciting year for us. There's going to be no shortage of a news cycle that could potentially affect the supply chain, whether it's government regulation, government staffing, whether it's trade related. We're probably going to see a lot of news shape pricing and shape supply chain dynamics over the course of this year. And so, my encouragement to everyone involved that's listening to this today is stay in contact with your network, stay connected to your news sources like the National Provisioner, stay connected to folks like our research team, and we'll try to guide you through these chaotic times, but enjoy it. We're in a really fun business. These are really exciting times. Don't let the stress of the volatility and the higher prices wear you out. Be encouraged that we're marketing a product and we're working for an industry that consumers generally love. It's fun time to be in the food business, and it'll be an exciting time this year. And with this volatility always comes opportunity.
I couldn't have agreed more. Said it great. Lance, thank you so much for all of these really great deep category insights for the beef market. And thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for the time.